The military does not solve problems for the world. They create room, space, and time for problems to get solved in a political or a negotiated way. Military solutions should be the last resort. And when you decide to do it, you should go at it pretty hard. As you look at how you conduct your life, you need to grow mentally, morally, and physically. You need all three of those things.
Hi everybody, this is Dan Shan, co-founder of Hainan Islands Ministries, known as HIM for short, H-I-M. And welcome to the HIM Ohana, the HIM family, where we have this podcast where we welcome on board special guests to learn more about life, to build our faith, to learn things we have never thought about before. And we do this through inviting leaders who can expand our mind through their experience and wisdom. And today we have a very special, highly accomplished guest in retired Admiral Joseph Prueher, who is a friend and a follower of Christ. I had the privilege of being his pastor for him and his wife Suzanne for about 3 years before he left the service. And I want to read you, before I bring him on board, the highlights of his resume, which I should say, if I read his entire resume, it would take us into the next millennia because he is so accomplished. But I want you to know some of his achievements, because today's podcast is about leadership wisdom, leadership humility, and in this case, leadership with faith. And retired Admiral Joseph Prueher completed 35 years in the Navy, and that was in 1999 when he retired. His last command was Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Command, which we used to call SINCPAC, the largest military command in the world from the western United States to the Indian Ocean. So that's more than 100 million square miles. That was the time about 1996 to 1999, and he commanded all of the military personnel of land, sea, and air. So the hugest theater. And he served 2 presidents as the ambassador of China, 1999 to 2001. He has served on multiple boards of directors, including Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, New York Life. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and is vice chairman of the National Committee on the United States-China Relations. He was also the commandant of the midshipmen of the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. For the first 24 years of his service, he was a carrier base attack pilot and spent 3 years as a Navy test pilot. He is qualified in 52 types of aircraft, which I think is about 52 more than I am qualified. Though I have ridden a Boeing 777. I know that's impressive for you all. Oh, wait, I have been on a Bell Boeing Osprey. He has had extensive flight and combat experience with more than 5,600 flight hours and more than 1,000 aircraft carrier landings. Married to Suzanne for 57 years. And he has 2 children grown up, Brooks, who is an urban planner who lives in Colorado, and Josh, who is a CEO of 2 companies in Los Angeles. So, Admiral Joe Prueher, welcome and aloha to the HIM Ohana podcast. Welcome to the family, Joe.
Thanks very much, Dan.
It's so great to see you.
It's great to see you, too. I need to make one correction to what you said.
Okay.
I wasn't the ambassador of China. I was the ambassador to China. So
Everything's in the prepositions, isn't it?
Those are sensitive issues for us.
I understand, which shows your great diplomacy and wisdom, and we're going to talk about that later. Thank you. Yeah, they say all the theology is in the prepositions, too. Were you born of God or to God or with God? You know, all that. So that's amazing. I'm sorry?
I said we can always parse those things, remembering that Jesus did not speak English.
Yeah, that's right. Let's hear it for all of you who speak Aramaic today, because you could really help us in our studies. Well, golly, I was going to say Joe. Maybe I should say Admiral Prueher for this show. But that was one of the most extensive, accomplished resumes we've ever had in the history of Hainan Islands Ministries. And so just to start off, of all the things you have done, which was actually the most I was going to say fun, maybe I should say most rewarding for you? I mean, was it as a pilot or as an ambassador, SINCPAC, or head of the Naval Academy? What was really the most intriguing or most rewarding for you?
I have to say that getting aboard the ship on some dark night with an emergency in the deck pitching was probably the most rewarding thing that happened. But as I found for myself, having more accountability and responsibility, the more I had, the more I enjoyed the job. And so I think the best one was at SINCPAC, and others were extremely notable. Got to start some things, and it was good. But I think SINCPAC was the most rewarding one.
Well, great. And I know when you were ambassador to China, Suzanne invited me to come visit with you, and that's one of my biggest regrets in life, that I couldn't go over there and be with you and bicycle around Beijing and have great Chinese food, much better than here in Hawaii. So, well, as the movie Sound of Music says, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Starting with childhood. So how did you first begin your journey of faith? And what were some key points, maybe in later years, that really grew your faith?
I grew up in a family where having a strong faith was just expected. And because my dad was killed in World War II 9 months after I was born, I lived in a family with a grandmother, a mother, and 2 older sisters. I left when I was 17.
A lot of women.
And, yeah, it is. A lot of influence. But I think the thing that impressed me a lot early on is, one, it was presumed that you would have a faith. And both my mother and my grandmother had some pretty tough times in their lives, but had a great peace and faith. And I thought, gosh, I'd like to have that too. And one of the things we talked about, Dan, was because my dad was a Catholic, my mother had made a commitment to raise the children in the Catholic Church, which she did do, though she's a Presbyterian. And so every Sunday growing up, we went to 7 o'clock Mass, and then to Presbyterian Sunday school and church. So I've been theologically confused all my life.
Well, you've been very ecumenical. And she would pick the 7 a.m. Mass. Like, you couldn't sleep in and do the 10 o'clock Mass and then go to Sunday school. Oh, my gosh. And now presently you regularly attend a Presbyterian church, do you not, in Virginia? And go to Sunday school class, do you not?
That's correct. We do. We have a very a wonderful minister named Dee Dee Carson, and we have an active church. It's a small church in Virginia Beach, but the motto of the church, the purpose of the church, is to, inspired by the faith and truth of God, we try to nurture each other's faith and carry out Christ's mission in the world. So it's a short, simple one, but that's what the church is about.
Well, your baptism as a Catholic took, and you've been faithful ever since.
Yeah, that's right.
That's really great. Now, when and how did you decide to have a career in the Navy?
Because my dad was in the Navy, and I had 2 uncles that went to West Point, I really didn't decide for sure until I was in high school, and I got a letter from the football coach at Navy named Wayne Harden, saying come play football for Navy, which though I had a okay high school football career, I wasn't up to snuff for Navy. We were second in the nation then. We had Roger Staubach and Joe Bellino, and this was a long time ago.
I remember him. He became the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys.
That's right. But it was about when I was a senior in high school and got an appointment and went. to the Naval Academy.
And that probably helped the family. You got a scholarship.
Yep.
Yep. So that was a full ride. And golly, isn't it amazing that you would then years later become the head of the Naval Academy? I mean, that's amazing, isn't it?
It was ironic in a way, and actually the way the structure is, the commandant is not the head of it. The superintendent is the head of it, but the commandant is in charge of all the athletic. Well, there's an athletic director, but all the military activities that go on at the academy. That was my job.
What a great appointment! That's so amazing that you could do that back at your alma mater. Incredible. And then, of course, go on to other great things. Now, people who are listening, many are about to start or are in their first chapters of a career. What advice might you have for aspiring leaders or those who might say, I want an accomplished resume like Admiral Prueher? Maybe two or three things you would want to share with someone who is in that boat. And then I'm going to talk about the older generation, but we'll start there.
Well, I think I thought about this, and I could hold forth for a while, so I'll try not to do that. But
go ahead.
One of the things is an attitude going in is how can I contribute? How can I contribute to this organization, and what way can I do the most? And I think I learned from some people that there are people that have to be told what to do and they do it. There are people that see what to do and they do it. There are people that see what the organization needs to accomplish and they do it. And I think those are important things to have in mind as you go. And also forming that is, people talk about a path, that you should be on a path. I think it's much better to be on an 8-lane highway, and you can have it pointed in a certain direction, but be on that highway where you have some choices to make as opportunities arise, and you're not so headed on a particular path. And the gold standard of that is to have the things where you have a talent and you have a interest in doing them, having them merge with the way you make your living through life. And you can do, a lot of people do one or the other, but doing both, having both is a wonderful way to lead your life. And I guess the last bit I would say, in better answer to your question, is try to outthink your boss. Think what are his problems or her problems? How do you solve those? And that's a good way to start out.
That's managing up, isn't it?
It is. But when I'm hoping we'll get around to talking about leadership, and there's a lot of managing down too.
Yes, amen on that. I love that's a new thought, that the 8-lane freeway is better than I must find my one path. And what I find interesting, I mean, for myself, I was a journalist, a filmmaker, a nonprofit leader, and I ended up as a pastor for several decades. And so I like what you said. If I said, no, I'm just going to be a journalist no matter what, I would have had maybe not as a fun life for myself. But I've also find the things you learn early on, there's a congruency that you use all that for later, right? My journalism helped me write for the ear, not for the eye. Helped me get data really quickly and break it down in very simple terms for people to understand. And I bet on your first ships or whatever position, all of that you remembered, and it helped you as SINCPAC, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command.
Oh, it does. It definitely does. You build a foundation for what you do, and there's some great sea stories and good examples of things that happen that help you when you grow up very later on. One of the things, if I can go back to my early life with my grandmother, she taught me a valuable lesson. She spent about a month teaching a very stubborn young man, one, to try to understand the difference between stubbornness and persistence. One was good, one was not. And the other is to be able to say, I could be wrong, which was is a good thing to carry through life as well.
It's hard for a four-star admiral to even think I could be wrong in dealing with.
No.
No. I want to talk about more of that later when we get into leadership, because that's a fascinating thing. Now, here's something I wanted to just pass by you, because this is very recent. Just a few days ago, somebody said to me, and this fits into, we've talked about young leaders, and now I want to talk about those who are a bit older and down the path. This person brought up how Tony Campolo, a sociologist, spoke of a survey of people who are 95 years or older. And the question was, what would they do differently if they could live their life over again? And it fell into three categories, and I want to see how you feel about it. They generally said, or the majority said, they wish they reflected more, risked more, and do more things that would live on after they died. And I was wondering, how do you feel about those categories? Or maybe you feel, you know what, I had a career that did pretty well in those three things.
I think particularly the first two, I have done my share of that and feel pretty good about it. The thing of live on after you die, I think that lives on in some people that you might have influenced along the way, and your family, what your children do, how your, if you're married, how your marriage goes. I think that's, but by and large, I think when you die, it's like pulling your finger out of a bucket of water. It ripples a little bit and then it smooths over. And I think living to leave a public legacy is not such a worthy goal as to the other people that you've influenced, and how, we'll talk about this when we get to leadership too, how the people that you've worked with, how well they've done and how they've influenced things. So I think the influence is subtle. Legacy, you have to define the term legacy a little bit to make it work for me.
Right. And I suppose it could get very prideful too, thinking back, oh, look at all the legacy I've left, And so I want to talk a bit, maybe on the opposite of pridefulness, a bit about humility and leadership, and and this is about reflecting more. I was at your Camp Smith change of command and retirement ceremony as the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Command back in 1999, and I recall something that you said that was really for me, an indicator of humility. And you in your address to everyone that day, you thought of a friend, and he may have been a classmate from the academy, who had died in the Vietnam War as a pilot, and you were reflecting and wondered how you were standing before us with 35 years in the Navy, and yet your friend never had the chance to see his career flourish. Why did you decide to share that at your retirement ceremony as you were stepping down from a long and phenomenal naval career?
Well, the fellow's name was Chuck Parrish, and he was a very close friend. We went through flight training together, and he was shot down in the prime of life when he was about 23, 24 years old, something like that. And we had done a lot of things together. And by the way, I want to tell you, I'm looking out the window. It's snowing in Virginia Beach right now.
A little different than Hawaii.
Yeah, but Chuck was a wonderful guy. He had great children, a great wife, and but he was struck down. And the irony I guess, of how things can turn on a dime, and you can say it's the will of God or whatever, but chance gets into that, and I think that's a constructive way instead of the victim way of saying, why me? I mean, how come that could have just as well have been me? And it was a motivator for me to think, and there are other people too, but he was the closest, and to think about how the things he might have done, and sometimes when I was being lazy or something, I'd think about that a little bit and say, well, get hot, Prueher. You know, you owe it, and you owe it to others. And I get a little bit back to the religious thing here of here am I, send me, which is okay. Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Here I go.
Right.
Yeah.
From the book of Isaiah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Very, very similar. Did you see Saving Private Ryan, Admiral?
I saw snippets of it. I didn't see the whole movie.
At the very end, they point to a tombstone, and they say to the surviving person, you know, just remember what the person who died, who played Tom Hanks, he said, earn it in your life. And so very, very similar. And but I was so impressed that at a time when you could have talked about your accolades or achievements, you just thought of a sense of gratefulness also, that here you were, and knowing that your buddy Chuck didn't have that opportunity. And I thought that was a great sense of thankfulness. Also at that ceremony, you had asked me to do an opening prayer, and in such high-level ceremonies, everything is worked out in detail. I remember seeing this huge, there were several 3-ring binders. I'm sorry, younger generation, that was before PDFs, but 3-ring binders of all these, really, that articulated information of how the ceremony was to go, where people would sit, how people were to be in uniform, when the cannons would fire, how people were to be presented on stage, what music was to be played, and an aide placed me in the back of the stage while the true dignitaries, like yourself, the Secretary of Defense Bill Cohen, the U.S. Senator Daniel Inouye, and the Admiral Dennis Blair, who would be sworn in and succeed you on that day. So the really important people sat in the front row center, and peons like me with no rank, either in civilian or in military, sat, I would say, about 12, 15 feet at least in the back of the stage. And the dignitaries were individually introduced and brought on stage with great pomp and circumstance, and whistled or piped on board on stage. And when you came up on stage, of course, we were all standing at that point. But there's somehow in the corner of your eye, I don't know how you did this, because this is a day all about you, really. And Dennis Blair, Admiral Blair, you saw me sitting way in the back, and you broke protocol, and you walked over to me, grabbed my chair, and carried it in front of everyone, hundreds of people, and placed the chair in the front row with the other 4 dignitaries, and you told me to sit there. And I was stunned. I was then sitting next to U.S. Senator Daniel Inouye, who looked at me with 2 expressions. One was like, "Who are you?" And the other one being, "Well, there goes the neighborhood. Who's this guy sitting next to me?" So why did you break protocol and carry my chair over to the front row?
Well, you were God's man. And so I think about that. I had asked you to come, and you said you would, and what you had to say was very important. And I think, actually, I saw Senator Inouye several times after that in Washington. He mentioned that also, and he said he liked the fact that you came up there. So that was good.
That's nice.
Yeah,
That's nice.
And I think we can get too huffy about protocol sometimes.
But to me, and not that it's about me, or clearly it wasn't about me, but that there are other incidences that just show your leadership style was such a servant leadership, and I would say a humble leadership. And I want to mention just a couple more that you asked me and my family to go on a helicopter ride from the land to land on, I think it was the USS John Kennedy aircraft carrier, and you were asking me to join you and Suzanne to I don't know what you call it, to review, like a passing review of ships. What is the term you all use in the ships?
It's a passing review. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had several purposes in inviting me on that trip. Though in the end I couldn't do it because I had to be in Washington D.C. of all the weekends. But why was that important for you to offer that my family on that trip? I mean, that was such a special privilege, and I mean, I think there was, again, a faith reason, not only just a fun reason.
Well, I guess the underlying thing is we liked you and your family.
Oh, that's nice.
And the other part is we attended your church, the First Presbyterian Church in Honolulu, got a lot out of it. You may remember my nephew and niece were there too. Jim and Becky Conzelman were there, and they were participants in the church. It meant a lot to us, and my sense was you had not had that much integration in what the Navy was doing or what the military was doing in Hawaii before that. And so I thought this is a good quid pro quo, and you might say a good prayer for us every now and then.
Well, thank you. And I think you had mentioned to me that you wanted all the men and women on the carrier, at least, to see a pastor get off that helicopter and walk on deck to say, with all this firepower, there's another power, too, that we have to be conscious of. I remember you had said that. And you'd be happy to know that was my entree to understanding and getting acquainted with the military. And today, the U.S. Navy comes to me in Hawaiian Islands Ministries to ask, how do we bring pastors in to help the Navy in case we ever go to war? The chaplains all have to go on their ships and leave. How can we start now building a relationship and teaming? And HIM has been very involved in that. We had 80 pastors show up to meet the chaplains last year. And so it's that has gone on thanks to you. The relationship has been very strong, and we got to meet the new Indo-Pacific Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Prueher, who, as you know, he's an acquaintance of yours. He's a really great man, and also a man of great faith.
I was going to mention that if you had. He is. He's absolutely one of the. Not one of, he may well be the best that the Navy has in that rank. He's a superb person, smart, faithful, very extremely able, and he's good enough to stay in touch with guys that have been retired a long time too.
He's a great guy. And you know, this theme of how you share your leadership and the blessings you have and the opportunities and maybe privileges. I remember also when two major league baseball teams came to Hawaii for the first time, and you were asked to throw out the first pitch. And it wasn't the governor, it wasn't the mayor, it wasn't a U.S. senator, but it was you they chose, and I think it was the San Diego Padres and the White Sox. And as you walked out to the mound, escorted by an airman, just at the last second, instead of you throwing that first pitch, you handed the ball to the airman. And I was so, stunned. So why did you do that?
Well, this has a much more mundane answer. He had a lot better arm than I did.
But you practiced, didn't you?
Yeah, a little bit, but I've got shoulder problems and stuff. He didn't have them yet.
Yeah. But I think he was also Airman of the Year, too. So it was
he was. And it was a big deal for him. It was fun in a lot of ways.
Well, you share your glory and your opportunity with others. And you once told me that with all of the military power at your disposal, and again, you had the biggest theater or biggest command there was in the world, over 100 million miles, and all air, land, and sea services. You said you saw military power at your, saw it in most cases basically to be used to give diplomacy a chance. You didn't want to go to war. You wanted to buy time for peaceful conversation or negotiations to happen. Can you unpack that a bit? And then I want to go to a very specific international incident that happened.
Well, this is a sensitive topic these days. And I think the fact is the military does not solve problems for the world. They create room, space, and time for problems to get solved in a political or a negotiated way that where hopefully thoughtful people can come up with good solutions for how nations can get along together. And so I think it's important to realize at the upper levels there's a political military interface where you have to work together and you have to think about the political impact other than just being a knife in your teeth warfighter about it and how you use those services. Younger, when you don't have heavy responsibilities, you do have responsibilities for other people's lives. You want to be, I think my opinion, military should be the last resort. Military solutions should be the last resort. And when you decide to do it, you should go at it pretty hard and try to end it quickly and the fracas quickly. But really, it's creating space and time for other people, State Department people, economic people, to come to some solutions between nations. And the other part, now we talk about the Department of War, and I'm going to try not to wax political here, but Department of Defense, the key is deterring war, and you do that by being strong. You don't do it by being weak and acquiescing. And so you need a strong military, but you don't need a belligerent military, but you need one that can, when the bell rings, they can act. And it's interesting. Again, this might get onto a later thing. Our Chinese, sometimes friends, sometimes not, but our Chinese competitors, I will say, through the influence of Sun Tzu, his writing is the truly great general and servant of the state wins without fighting. You try to win without fighting, you can bluff or however. And the reason for that is war is so costly. Even if you win, you've given away a lot of national treasure. Not given it away, you've expended a lot of national treasure that could be spent on other things. And so the Teddy Roosevelt idea of speak softly and carry a big stick, the biblical thing of slow to anger are things that I think senior leaders need to keep in mind.
And the irony is, I believe Sun Tzu's famous classic book on war was called The Art of War, was it not?
That's right.
And yet he was saying, you don't want to go to war needlessly.
No.
It's too much of a
right.
cost to the country in lives and resources, and creating a revenge factor probably with your enemies.
Yeah.
And
he was a big proponent of spies and deception. as well.
Yeah, that's true too. Well, we have that arm of our defense too.
Yeah.
So I just used the word classic as a classic book on war, but a classic story of diplomacy is something you were involved in, actually had to do with China. And sometimes people call it the Hainan Island incident, or the Hainan Island so-called apology. But it happened in April 2001, which was not an April Fool's joke in any way. And do you want to unpack it? It was a 10-day international incident between the United States and China. Do you want to describe that? I mean, I can do it, but I think you would probably do it better. You have the inside.
Well, we've only got about a half hour more, so.
But this is you're a living treasure, man. I want to milk this as much as we can about you and your thoughts here.
I'll try to give a synopsis of it and some of the factors that not everybody knows a lot about. A harbinger of not of this event, but of the relationship that existed between the U.S. and China militarily, started in '96 when the Chinese said they were going to shoot missiles at Taiwan. And it was about 6 weeks after I'd gotten to PACOM. John Shalikashvili was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Bill Perry was Secretary of Defense, and Bill Clinton was president. And it was on the 22nd of March, actually, of that year, that they said they were going to shoot missiles at Taiwan, and they were trying to influence the Taiwan election. And the U.S. was committed to a peaceful resolution of the Taiwan issue, and still is by the Taiwan Relations Act, though there are various interpretations of that, and it's changed in the last 25 years. But we reacted in a way, thinking about who the audiences were, but we reacted in a way that was forceful, we thought, with the 7th Fleet, and yet moderate. We didn't go into the straits with our ships or anything like that. We stayed out on purpose. And remembering that 1996 is only 7 years after the Tiananmen Square issues. So we've been working on a relationship, and we didn't want to set that back farther than we needed to. Yet we needed to send a strong signal to the Chinese, to them, that wasn't acceptable to us or for Taiwan for a peaceful. We didn't see it as a peaceful resolution. We wanted another audience was our allies in the area. Will the United States stand up to what we've said we're going to do? The people on Taiwan this isn't a blank check for whatever you want to do. And then also for the people in the United States can they be proud of how we act? And so we reacted to that in a moderate way, that the president of China, Jiang Zemin, at that point understood, and we talked about that, we could have been much more bellicose than we were, but I think we sort of hit the seam properly in that event, and it established a relationship a little bit with the president of China and me as in my job as SINCPAC.
Right.
And okay, now,
were you in SINPAC or ambassador at that point? You were.
No, I was ambassador when the collision occurred. That we're going to get.
We're doing the preface here. The preface.
This is my preamble to this thing.
Got it.
And he also came through Hawaii in 1997 on his first trip, and we had tried to reestablish some communication, or to establish communications with the PLA, which they weren't used to talking to anybody else. There are a lot of branches and sequels to this, and I won't go into all of them. But anyway, what it did is it created a relationship, and I don't want to overstate this, but of some communications and some degree of moderation between the PACOM and the leadership of China and the U.S. PACOM is the U.S. representative on some of these things. So fast forward to 2001 April Fool's Day, there was what we ended up calling a collision, but the Chinese F-8 jet, piloted by a guy named Wang Wei, incidentally.
Anglicizing that, it's
I know.
It almost sounds like an April Fool's joke, but it's not.
Yeah, I know. But that was his name, and this is the Prueher version of this, because we agreed not to after a while not to spend too much time talking about whose fault it was, but rather to solving it, which is an important piece of this. But anyway, he collided with a EP-3 aircraft, which was badly hurt. It took the wing off of it, and it took out an engine, took off the nose cone, and the pilot, a guy named Shane Osborne, had 24 people on the airplane, and he got control of the airplane, and they landed safely on Hainan Island. Now, the people on Hainan Island did what they should have done. They let the airplane land. He was in extremis. They could have blocked the runway and done that, but they didn't do that. Maybe if they'd asked permission, they would have been told to do that, but they didn't. And so the crew was safe. I mean, they were on deck. They weren't necessarily treated with warmth and conviviality, but they were there. So,
and Admiral, just before we go further, just to make it clear for those, especially the younger generation that doesn't know the incident, the Chinese were thinking that the EP-3 airplane was a signals intelligence plane, and so that's why they were so close to it, trying to move it away. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a signals intelligence plane,
okay.
And they had,
which we would call a spy plane.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was those days.
Yeah,
but the pilot was a pilot who had done intercepts before that too on these airplanes, and we were in international waters. They get to do that, but he lost control apparently of his closure rate on the EP-3 and ended up impacting it, and so it caused a collision. And you could say he rammed it. I don't think he intentionally rammed it. I don't know that for sure, but I don't think so.
He meaning Wang Wei, the pilot.
Yeah.
The Chinese pilot. Yeah.
But so that Sunday morning, we tried to get. Colin Powell was the Secretary of State. Talked to him and said, I'm trying to get in touch with the Foreign Office in China, and they won't answer their phone. They had caller ID too, and they didn't want to talk yet. And so it wasn't until that night that I got to talk to them, and they summoned me over to the Foreign Affairs Office, and they said, you invaded our airspace, you've rammed our airplane, you've killed the pilot, you've landed without permission, we demand an apology and we demand reparations. And I responded, I disagree on all those counts. And this was Sunday night. We disagreed.
And you're ambassador at this point.
I was ambassador at that point, yeah. And it was also a situation that I'll say, being a pilot, I knew more about the aerodynamics of this than anybody else involved in it, which Colin Powell recognized and said, let him deal with this. And so we went forward with that. We went the next day, And the next couple of days were haggling over whose fault it was, who had rammed, this is where was my strong suit. I could say, the EP3, it doesn't work that way. They don't. He was at max endurance airspeed. He can't do this. And so then I talked to a guy who had formerly been on the National Security Council, but he was not this was when George Bush was president now. And not for long, but he'd been there a little bit. But this was Ken Lieberthal and he said the Chinese, they made this statement, they're going to have a hard time backing away from it. And so he said that's when we agreed, and I had to go back to Secretary Powell, who was just absolutely marvelous in dealing with the Washington situation, as he always was, and said, boss, I need to change tack here. I'd like to say that this was a collision and not spend more time arguing over whose fault it was, because we're stuck on that, and we can't get farther toward getting the crew out of there, which was our big motive. And so we did. We changed it, and that's when we decided to just call it a collision. And then we went on from there and negotiated it. The Chinese negotiator was a guy named Zhou Wenjiang, and we ended up getting to an agreement to get the crew out, but it was something to happen without any fanfare. And we did that quietly with airplanes flying out of Guam to come in and pick them up on an early morning without publicity and get the crew out of there after 11 days. Now, the other part of that was the Chinese had to have an apology of some sort. They wanted an apology. Well, we didn't have anything to apologize for. We didn't instigate the event, and so we weren't going to apologize. But to solve it, and I'm not a Mandarin speaker, but we had people that were. The nuances of saying regret, sorry, and all those are deep, and so we couldn't get by with regret, so we got to sorry. So what can we say we were sorry for? Well, we said, we're sorry you lost your pilot, okay, humanitarian stuff. And we apologized, sorry that you didn't hear us when we called for an emergency landing at Hainan. And the way things work, it was 2 layers of separation from the president saying that. So they let the ambassador sign that letter that said that. And so that was the letter. And the Chinese used it in a way that we knew they would, to say they'd apologized. But we got the crew out. And the interesting thing that a lot of people don't know is we could have gotten the airplane out too by the end of May. They'd agreed to do that. But at that time in Washington, it switched over from Colin Powell to Donald Rumsfeld, because it's a military thing. He sent a fellow out there to be the negotiator, and they were stonewalling the Chinese, and the Chinese looked at me and said, "What happened here?" So they said, "Well, okay, if you're going to act that way, watch this." And they started disassembling the airplane. So anyway, that worked out, and I think it worked out pretty well for given the tenseness that could have occurred. Now, the other thing to think about in that, I'm probably going on too long, but the Chinese, after a couple of days of hyperbole, they realized we're their biggest foreign market. We had what's now called permanent PNTR, permanent normal trade relations, which used to be most favored nation. That was a prelude for them getting into the World Trade Organization, and we had the hammer on that, and then also had the 2008 Olympics. They wanted to have the 2008 Olympics, so those things were helped our arguments out a little bit to get that thing done. So that's the way that worked out.
Well, it's an amazing story, and as I said earlier, it has become a classic case study in diplomatic language and process, and the stakes were high. I mean, they could have imprisoned the 24 servicemen and women, correct? Or they could have threatened them with harm. Given enough time, they could have, I guess, gotten our equipment and downloaded a lot, but I'm sure we took care of that while we were sitting there on the tarmac. But it's just, bummers, most of it, not all of it. And it foreshadowed what would then become an ongoing strategic rivalry or competition between the two countries. But it also shows how one military accident can rapidly escalate into a very volatile situation. And again, in leadership, I talked earlier about congruence. Praise God that our ambassador was the think pack who is certified in 52 aircrafts, who knew about the EP3, and all of that came to being. And I would add, being a follower of Jesus, you probably were praying a lot, like, give me the wisdom and the thoughts or the ideas to say a major regret and very, very sorry, as opposed to we apologize that we did something wrong.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of other things there, because Suzanne is here, and we got in the habit of, when we lived in China, of talking to the chandelier because we thought we were being listened to all the time. And she mentioned, why don't we just bring 2 carrier battle groups over and solve this thing? We didn't say that. She's denying that she said that. But
I did not say that.
Yeah. China may have the Empress Dowager, but we have Suzanne, so,
I know. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And one other thing, Zhou Wenjiang, who was their interlocutor with me, who had just come from being ambassador to Australia about 3 days before this incident. And we were worried about how our aircrew was being treated down there, because there was some sleep deprivation and some stuff like that, but they went on a hunger strike so they brought an executive chef into the hotel where they were staying, and Zhou Wenjiang said, "You're complaining about that? They're better off than about 2/3 of the Chinese people are."
So they put the crew in a hotel. Is that what you said? I didn't know that. I thought they were on the plane all this time.
No. They sequestered them. They kept them awake a long time. Some of them, and it wasn't. They were edgy. That was tough.
I'm sure they had microphones in those hotel rooms too.
But they did it. They did a good job. They did a good.
Wow, they got takeout food in China, and I still didn't get to join you all. Now, there is a humility in leadership that makes leaders greater still. And would you agree that it's not a lack of confidence, but a true humility allows a leader actually to be more effective if you have true humility? Would you agree with that?
I do agree. And I think if you think of humility as an accurate assessment of your capabilities and your shortcomings, then it's more it's not deference necessarily. I think one of my favorite phrases is a person is confident, competent, with not a trace of arrogance. And I think that's sort of the humility part that I like.
Wow, that's good to take it home. And I was thinking, how great it would be if we're talking about reality, if a CEO could just say to an associate, "Hey, my bad, I was wrong on that," or "I'm sorry," have a regret there, right? And that would just make such a big difference on staff and also model it too. You make me think of Max Dupree, who was the CEO of Herman Miller Company that made the Eames chair. And he was also the former chairman of the board for Fuller Seminary. And he brought me on board during his term then. But Max Dupree, in his great book, Leadership is an Art, he says a good leader does mainly two things, and I would love your reflection on this. He says the first is to define reality, which is what you kind of said. And the last is to say thank you. And in between, a leader must become a servant and a debtor, he says, meaning a profound sense of responsibility and accountability to their organization and its people, and to ensure the best possible environment and outcomes. And so I was always fascinated by that. He taught me and others, the first is to define reality and to say thank you. And how do you agree with that, resonate with that, or how does that hit you?
It's hard to disagree with that. I have a sort of a idea of leadership that entails three things, and it would not disagree with any of that is said. But I won't go into my threes here. But I think
I would love to hear the three. You want to just list the three?
The thing, I'm from Tennessee, and I worked on dairy farms in Wisconsin, and I think of a three-legged milking stool, and it's stable, okay? Like a camera tripod. It's stable. 2 legs is not enough, and 4 is extra. So, the three things, and I think that the idea of the threes is as you look at how you conduct your life, you need to grow mentally, morally, and physically, and you need all three of those things to get in. Reverend Chun, to get into the religious part, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. Sort of the same thing. There are three parts to it. And in leadership, I think the 3 parts are: 1, knowing your stuff, which is define reality, but also know your environment, being good at that. The other is being a person of character, having moral and physical courage to take stands that you need to take, and so that your people know that you do that and can see that image in you. And then the physical part is taking care of your people, and that's making sure not just that they have a nice desk to work at or they have equipment, but they have opportunities to progress and grow, to know about their families, know the things that they're dealing with, and to take good care of them such that, I've alluded to it before, a leader can be known by where do the people that used to work for him, how well do they do? What are they like? And so I think those 3 things of knowing your stuff, and I think this is, I hope, a goal out of this chat today is ways to think about things for people. What are some different ways to think about stuff? And Bertrand Russell, British educator, said education is what's left after you've forgotten all the facts. And so it's not just information, not just husbanding. It's in the hierarchy of data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and faith. it's the wisdom part of it is what a leader has to be. So I think those three things of knowing your stuff, having moral and physical courage, and then taking care of people are the elements that make a good leader and a strong organization.
When you mention knowing your stuff, how does one balance a high level of competency with the need for God? A need for a higher power, a Messiah other than yourself? Because there are a lot of people out there who say, I'm pretty accomplished and competent. Why do I even need God?
Well, I will go back to an aviation thing. The great fighter pilots always talk with their hands, and the expression of being out of airspeed and ideas. When you get to a situation where you're dead in the air, and that's where you can get into the faith issue. When you're in a loose, sometimes you always exceed your capability to deal with things, and that's where you need faith. There was a guy who ran a wind tunnel at Langley. I used to do out of control flight testing in my test work, and and he used to say at one point that if what you plan to do doesn't work to get the airplane out, take your hands and feet off and say, you got it. and that'll sometimes work too. But
I bet. But you've never been afraid of speaking about your faith. I remember once I invited you to speak at a business person's breakfast at the Pacific Club here in Honolulu, and your PR department of the Navy said, no, you can't do that. You can't talk about your faith. But you said you're going to do that anyway. Do you remember that day?
Sort of, yes. Yeah.
But it was important.
Yeah.
Suzanne's walking out. Is that what's happening?
Yes, she is.
Yeah,
you got.
It's okay. That's okay.
So did your audience. Okay.
Yeah. So if someone were to say to you, and I just have a few more questions, how can we bring light to a dark world? We can't all be admirals. What would you say to them?
This, in my experience, I like some adages that some of them work and some.
That's great.
The greatest adage of all, and the thing that I've found is a rule that always works in the long haul, is do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. And I think in addition to Christianity, a lot of the other great religions of the world have something like this as a part of them too. So I think treating other people with respect, you've got to be wary that you're not being played. But treating others with respect, it's always been my experience that works every time. And that's a faith issue, and then there's just a lot of stuff we don't understand. Things happen that we don't understand, and we're learning new things all the time that we don't understand yet. And so it makes me think there's something out there that is worth believing in.
So how do we not lose hope when it seems at times the world's going the wrong way in terms of political divide, meanness, the environment getting worse, maybe a fear of AI, artificial intelligence, and what all that means? How does one not lose hope?
You have to. Well, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, and sometimes you get in that situation where frequently these days, when you look at a lot of trends that seem to be going in the wrong direction, you have to hope, and more than hope, but have actually believe that there can be some corrections that will occur that will keep it. It won't necessarily be without pain to go through it, I hope that it'll eventually correct. We've lived in a marvelous time in the United States. We haven't talked about Pearl Harbor Day yesterday, 84 years of the end of World War II.
Yes.
There's a great book called Facing the Mountain about 442nd Combat Regimental Team with Dan Inouye and a lot of the Japanese people in that.
Tough time.
Yeah, tough time. And so we've been through some hard times. And hopefully some good people will show up and revector some things for us.
That's a good thing to remember, the reference points, right? That was a bad time in Japanese internment, a bad time when John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr. all got assassinated around the same time, and those are tough times. We got through them. So, final question, which I ask almost all of our guests in the Ohana, is Galatians 6:9 says, "Do not be weary in doing good." So, what sustains you, has sustained you, in not being weary, and keep on doing good for all your years of service and beyond?
Well, insofar as I do do that, some of it I have to, if I'm candid about it, is I care what other people think. I don't disregard what other people. Some people I don't care what they think, but there are a lot of people that I do, and I would not like to disappoint them. And I think there's you look in the mirror and what kind of person are you? And it's important to be able to give an affirmative answer, and sometimes you need to step up your performance a little bit. So it's but I think there's hope there. There's hope there, and it's interesting as you get older, with a little less run time ahead of you, that your thoughts change a little bit.
Well, while you were, in flight or on the water, you have served our country so well in so many different areas, and whether as ambassador or in the service or as an educator or administrator of educational, plus being in boards of financial companies is incredibly important, that they might be responsible and moral, and so we say it often to servicemen and women, thank you for your service, but truly we want to say thank you for your service for so many decades of incredible leadership. And you're sharing your mana'o, as we say, wisdom with us today that might help a younger generation and those who are further down in more chapters in their employment or service. And so what you've shared with us today has been incredibly, incredibly helpful, Admiral Prueher. And we are so grateful for what you shared and have done.
Thanks, Dan. And there are some wonderful young people coming along to take, and hopefully they'll be in positions of influence and bring us home.
Right. And as you said, even the present, I shouldn't say even, the present, it used to be called SINCPAC, is Indo-Pacific, I think, Commander.
Yeah, hard to say.
Admiral Paparo is just another example of the next generation. Is very competent, very loving, and knows there's a God in this world that needs to get wisdom from too, and strength. And so And to your viewers, if you like interviews like this, please support this podcast by subscribing, by following, by hitting the bell that's on your screen, and you will be part of the Him Ohana, and we'll tell you about future episodes. But for now, again, Admiral Prueher, mahalo, thank you. Give my love to Suzanne again as she's kind of walked off, and join me in saying aloha to all of our viewers.
Aloha.
So, aloha. God bless
See ya.
everyone.